Hello and welcome to Eye Openers. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. We're about to have a really fun and probably interesting conversation here with Lucas James. What do you think, Lucas?
I'm excited. Thanks so much, Brittany.
And
Appreciate being on.
I give you that little intro because we had a pre-call behind the scenes and it definitely went like zing, 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 all these different angles. And I know you have so much value to add. So many insights are going to just ping up from this conversation. And that's what I'm excited about. So no pressure, man. No pressure.
Yeah, exactly. No pressure. I have a tendency to be a little scatterbrained, so I will try my best to not on this call. So thank you
No,
for the
no.
introduction. And yeah, I'm very excited to give some value where I can.
Awesome. Well, here's where you can start giving us some value. Tell me what you're drinking today. So most of the time we
Yeah.
host Eye Openers live in the morning, but for you and I, it's our afternoon. So I'm
Yeah.
just curious,
Yeah.
are you still caffeinating away or what are you drinking?
I actually I drink a lot of water. That's definitely one thing I do to stay hydrated. I used to drink a lot of coffee, but I started to take this just very mild supplement. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's called St. John's Wort.
Mhm.
It's kind of like my coffee because instead of making me amped, it just makes me more focused, which is great. And you can get
Oh,
at any CVS. It's just on the shelves. So I mean, it's a very available supplement, but it's great. I mean, that's my coffee. So I'll pour it in my tea sometimes, and that's what I'll drink. So
awesome. Well, good for you. And this is why I love sharing this. Like sometimes I have 10-minute conversation about what people are drinking and they bring such interesting stuff to the table. So
yeah, it definitely says a lot about a person. My business partner is like always so on it, and he drinks like a Bang energy drink every
oh,
day.
geez.
So
This is not medical advice. Do not drink Bang, but
yeah,
it
a lot of caffeine. It's a lot of caffeine. Yeah.
yeah,
So
a lot of stuff in it. But yes, I am post tennis here in the sunshine, so I have my
oh,
water
nice,
today.
nice.
So I'm with you with the hydration. Let's give you a real proper introduction here because people are like on their toes. We don't really know what to expect from this guy, but let's give them like a little bit of insight here about who you are.
Yeah.
Tell us your story. Like, give us the highlights.
100%. Yeah. So I launched my main business. Now it's like kind of a brand group, but I launched my main business, Twiz Marketing, in 2018 out of my college dorm room. And I didn't really know anyone, so I had to go and just hustle, get a lot of clients. Was able to scale that. Now we do about $1.72 million per year in revenue.
Nice.
Fully bootstrapped, zero debt. Like that's what I always try to push on everybody. Is like you don't need to go raise a lot of money. You do this bootstrapped. If I was able to do it, you could do it. So that's a big thing. And then starting this last year, I always thought that marketing was a way to get into development, like software development. And so I taught myself software development, and I built a software called AgencyGo, and we have over 200 members as part of our community. And we help agencies scale to $185,000 per month in revenue, like we were able to do. So that's about me. And then my last little tidbit is that to me, it's not about really making money. My goal is to, I guess it sounds really audacious. I do want to make $1 trillion, but I want to redistribute it into tech and innovation. I only want to live off like $50,000 per year. I just believe so strongly in the ability for technology to help solve the world's issues. I feel like capitalism, at least when done right, is a good way to do that if you try to be selfless. So I think I try to get other people to think that way too. How can we use money and technology to implement and help change society for the better? So that's one thing.
Well, I love your audacious goal, and people are like nervous about saying some of those things out loud. But this
I
is like,
am too.
you know what? If your goal doesn't scare you a little bit, then
Yeah.
you're not a big enough goal for you, and that's
Yes.
amazing. I mean, look what you've been able to accomplish to date. So
Thank you.
I would call you out if you didn't have a big enough goal. So that's awesome. Thanks for sharing
Thanks.
it.
Thank
I
you.
also love this idea of the redistribution of it to solve bigger problems beyond yourself. And I think even the greatest challenge beyond creating $1 trillion is living off of $50,000 in Southern California. So I can't wait to hear
Yeah.
you do that. Let me know.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I will say caveat because I thought about it more. That is $50,000 in spend, right? So like it really is probably about $70,000 in earnings, right? So that is honestly about, I think, right for California, because I think I looked at it, it's like what the amount you need to make just to even have a normal life in California, and I think it's about 70,000, which is so sad because it's just crazy to think about how many people can't get to that point. So definitely wish there's a better way we can do that inside the economy. But yeah, that's sort of the idea. So yeah, in terms of living that much, I think the biggest thing is that I kind of see money as this way to reduce suffering, right? Like when done right. And so for me, like I see it as you can, if you kind of eliminate the need for money in your own life, it becomes a lot easier. Now I will say that, I don't have kids. I don't have a lot of responsibilities other than my business. So I don't know if that's going to really hold for the rest of my life, but I want to try at least and see if I can really stretch a dollar and make it work, so.
I love that. I mean, it's forcing you to be resourceful and rethink, what money means to you and what is a need versus a want. Like, I think it's a really cool reframe. And the last person I spoke to was a CEO marrying like construction and tech, and he was just talking about the power of these kind of mental challenges, and the perspective that it creates is a really helpful way to think about problem solving. So it's a way to kind of train your brain to think differently, and that lends itself to helping you in other areas. So
it definitely does. I think for me, I was really funny is there's a very big influence of like Hinduism and Buddhism in where I came from, which is Seattle. Surprisingly enough, there's a lot of that culture there. And so I actually felt like, even though I did go to Catholic school and was raised that way, I actually felt I ended up being more inspired by that a bit more. So I'm very interested in their teachings in terms of just living humbly and like living a very modest life. That's definitely, I guess I'm a minimalist is what they're saying nowadays. So that's definitely, I think, my outlook.
Awesome. I love that. Well, let's go back into that audacious dream space, because I want to hear you answer this question. So you guys know I love to start these off with a big kicker of a question to show you what we're trying to accomplish here.
Yeah.
You and I were to speak 3 years from now, like I call you up, you're like, oh, Brittany, it's so great to hear from you. I am so excited to tell you about.
My big goal is I want to build like a WeWork gets a bad rep nowadays, so probably not exactly like WeWork. Maybe it's not a good example, but I want to build something like WeWork, but for housing, in a sense, to make a more equitable housing system, and make it more like designing your dream community. So I've had a goal to build this thing called Dreamshare, and I hope that it can be a better way to design our communities. And I hope at that point I have enough resources to implement it, because it's a much harder thing to scale than software or an agency, because it requires building communities. So that is what I'd like to talk to you about in 3 years, if I can get to that point. So
I can't wait to hear about it.
I hope so.
So tell me, I mean, obviously I'm sure you've heard of like Tony Hsieh and his communities and stuff that he was trying to build. How does it look, does it look comparable to that? How's it different? What do you think?
Great question. So I think that we're moving into well, you see with the metaverse, obviously, like it'll be really interesting how people view their physical spaces if we end up all being in the metaverse, which sounds crazy, but I think very possible in the next 10 years that a lot of our time is in the metaverse. So, and I don't know if I'm on the pro for that or con for that, but it is very interesting to think about. I think we are, though, moving into more, just like with work, we're trying to take more ownership over our lives. I think that's why you see so many people resigning. And so the community I'd like to build is a community where I basically crowdsource ideas to build different communities. And then I let the world vote on which communities they'd want to live in. And then we do it kind of Tesla style, where, you put down a deposit if you want to live there. And the place that gets the most deposits, the design that gets the most deposits, is the winner. So it'd be really cool if you could, in a sense, like build an environment almost like in the metaverse, saying this is what I want the community to look like, and then the one that gets upvoted the most is what's built. That would be really cool. And so I've had that idea for like 6 years now, and that's how I want the communities to be, I think. And I also am super against. I know this sounds crazy because it just seems like this is how the world works, but I've always been bugged by it. I'm super against long-term contracts on housing. I think that's crazy. I get why it's the case, but I mean, I wish it was different. And I hate having to put money down, which I understand why it's a thing, but like, what if I didn't have to? And I hate the fact that renters is basically like a cycle of poverty, right? Like you rent something, and you can't ever really own any equity in that thing you rent unless you buy. So there's so many families that just never have the opportunity to buy anything. And so if there's a way to like give people ownership over a community they're part of, right? Let's say you're one of the first people who become a member of this community, maybe you get ownership over it. And then if it ever sells or as it grows and expands, you get more ownership in it. That would be really cool. So that's how I kind of see communities in the future, is being more egalitarian and allowing for more opportunities for people to move up societally and try to break the cycle of poverty that we see in the world, right? So that would be the hope.
Yeah, so I see that like addressing two problems, right? Which is like more of that freedom of time and space, that I think that's why that's what we're seeing with the Great Resignation, right? Is people want that control of freedom of time and space, and that this creates a living situation that actually makes that more possible for people. So when people are living their van life and all these things and their house is sitting empty, how do we make that available for people? So
yes.
I've seen this it's kind of like a timeshare model, but for like your primary housing.
Yeah, it is. And I think I think the big thing is like if you were to ask, if you were to ask anybody, do you want to pay a down payment? Do you want to sign yourself a year-long lease? And do you want to pay $20,000+ a year for something that you don't own? They'd say no. But that's just the way the world works. So everyone says yes, right? So yes, it is kind of like a reinvention of that. There actually is a company, I think it's called Picasso, I believe. Yeah. They're growing really fast. And so I'm always of the mindset when I create something where I think, look, I'm just building this thing because it doesn't exist. But once it exists, I'd love to partner with them. So if someone comes sooner and builds this and builds a community that is more equal society and starts there and does that change, then I think I'm all for it. I don't need to be the first one. So hopefully someone does. Hopefully someone hears this with the means and does it right now.
Yeah. We'll do our best to share it and get it out there for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, with the kind of, I guess it's a trend, with the trend of minimalism, with the growth of like the metaverse and thinking about having these like digital assets versus like things that we have tangibly in our house, then it makes more sense to move in this direction, and that we would be more nomadic, right?
Yeah.
And that if we could just solve that in the housing situation, that would really free us up. And that is going to change not only the future of work, but the future of living. And what do communities need now at that point? And
exactly. And I do feel like that is the overlap that most people agree on, whether you're Republican or Democrat, or you have a religious view, or you don't have a religious view. I think, there's a lot of emphasis around the family unit in certain religions and things like that, which, a lot of people want to protect that and they view it a certain way. And I don't think I'm, I don't really have a leaning towards it one way or another, whether you want to live a more individualistic lifestyle or more around the family. But I think everyone can pretty much agree that community is a good thing. And I think a lot of the issues in our society are based on the fact that we just have a breakdown of the community structure, like however you view it, right? Like, I don't know who my neighbors are. I have no idea who my neighbors are, right? And why is that? It's because we're just forced in this society where you don't really ever get interactions. It's like what this would actually be interesting probably for the audience. There's a good book that a lot of people probably have already read called The Culture Code. I mean, for that.
Yeah, Daniel.
Yeah. Yes. And I think that's what you mentioned with Tony Hsieh, right? I think that's what they talk about in that book. But he and Apple
in that
Zappos, yeah. Him and Apple and all these and Netflix, they talk about, and Pixar, they talk about just people bumping into each other, right? That's like where innovation happens, happiness happens. Like, it's a lot better. And so I see it that way as well, where it's, well, I don't interact with people around me, so how am I supposed to get happier around them or feel any sort of bonds? It's easy for me to like disappear into my Oculus Rift if I have no connection with anyone around me. And I think the same thing will carry to the metaverse. Like, we might think it might make us more connected, but it actually might just keep us just as isolated, but just online, right? And so the hope is, how can you increase the societal bonds that hold us together and, allow us not to dissolve into a nation that is not where we want to live, right? Or just a world, right? A world, really.
Yeah. Totally. This is such a cool conversation. I want you guys to know we're totally off script right now, but that is fine with me.
Sorry about that.
Cool, but this is like totally my language. So oddly enough, so I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I can really speak to that like family side of things. And it was also recent enough for me that I made this like thinking transition from more individualistic to collectivistic, which is what you're talking about. But she had this, it was about Martin Luther King Jr. and it was talking about communities. And it says most of us have like work communities and communities by where we live. And what we were just talking about is how drastically that's going to change. And where we maybe get those social needs met is not so much in the physical space, but as much more in the digital space. We have been seeing this for the last 10 years.
Yes.
Like I did not just share anything groundbreaking right now, but what we have also seen, especially in the last 2 years, is this drastic increase in mental health problems and people experiencing anxiety and depression. And I think it has to do with this transition. We don't totally have it figured out yet. Like we think that this is connection, what we're experiencing online, but it is not meeting our needs in the same way that our brain has not gotten to that point yet. It has not evolved fast enough to allow those things to be as meaningful for us. We still do seek out this physical, social, relationships in different ways. And so how we bridge this gap, I don't know what that's going to look like, but it's very interesting.
Yeah, the mental health crisis is definitely a problem. And I definitely see it happening all the time, both in our community and employees who have mental health issues. And it's definitely something that you almost wonder, like, are we worse off than we were in the past in at least the mental health state of mind? I like to think we're progressing as a society, so I don't know if that's necessarily true. But I do almost wonder it's either that or we're just more aware of it now, right? Like maybe we're just more aware, but in either case, like it's a problem. And I really hope we can deal with it better in a lot of ways, so.
Yeah, definitely. There's like 100 things there. I'm just going to leave them alone though, but move forward.
Set them down.
Yeah. Well, so what do it's a tough line for an employer to ride right there, right? That you brought up, like knowing about your employees' mental health situations. I think we're hearing about it more because the stigma is starting to decrease about at least talking about it, which is super encouraging because that means more people are going to be working on the solution as we understand that it's a greater problem. So that's encouraging. But, as an employer, how are you managing that? Like when people talk about what's going on for them or when they don't even have the words for it, yet you notice like a decrease in their performance. What do you do about it?
Yeah. I am actively trying to be better at it. I always publish my executive plan for the year online. So I have mine on Google Drive. It's open to the public. One of the lines in there is I will strive to become less logical and more emotional. I'm very low empathy on the micro. I think on the macro I'm there, but on the micro in terms of like individual day-to-day interactions with people, I tend to be pretty low empathy. I think it's because I'm just so interested in the bigger picture, right? That I sometimes forget that these are issues that need to be addressed. So this year, the way I'm trying to, deal with it more is actually to do what I was mentioning with the community side of things. I feel like that we're going to be doing a lot more events this year, doing a lot more online gatherings, I guess, but just giving them something that feels like a community or building more of a community. That is one way. And the other way, through one-on-ones is always great, just to kind of dive into some of the questions that they might be or situations they might be experiencing. But it's also, I think, freedom in the job. So what I mean by that is I base all of my employees on performance, right? And what I mean by that is I let them set their own goals and I let them run as if they're their own micro business, right?
Entrepreneur.
I think that gives them more freedom, and we're not at a size right now where, because I only have like, I think 30 people on our team. We're not at the size now where we have people who are kind of just like cogs in a wheel, in a sense, like everyone is super important to the team. And so I kind of run it like that, where it's an entrepreneur sense. I have them set their own goals. And I think that freedom allows them to like structure their life around that goal and not around random deliverables that are maybe not as consequential as we might think they are. So those three things, I think, like having strong one-on-ones, building a sense of community however you can through events and gatherings, and then just freedom, because these are the things that make people happier, that allows them time to actually rest and recuperate. I don't care if somebody takes a day off at all. They don't even have to tell me. If they're hitting their goal, I don't care. One thing I tell people a lot too is I say, my goal for you is actually, like, a lot of times I'll say, hey, how much do you want to make this year? And they'll say $100,000 or something. And I'll say, that's great. But what's going to happen is once you hit $100,000 working full time, you're going to probably be like, how can I make $100,000 working a quarter of the time? And I want that for people, frankly. I think it's actually more of a success story for me as an entrepreneur if I can inspire someone or work with them to get to 25% output in terms of labor hours, but the same, if not greater output in terms of like the total value they're providing as if they were a full-time person. Because that means they found an efficiency that's been maximized, right? And so from a health standpoint, that's freedom, right? Getting to that point. So I try to emphasize that as like, focus on the value you're producing. I'll give you freedom. I'll give you leeway. As long as you perform, you can do what you want. That's all I really care about. So
I love that. So when they're making their own goals, do you come back to this with, with that perspective in mind? Like, do you ever say like, okay, I hear like this is the goal you have, but you told me you wanted to do this, have more freedom. Do you ever challenge them on that? Like, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I do. Cause I think I preface it, like, we make everybody who comes into the company fill out a, like 30 question application, selling us on why they should work with us. And I want to have A players in the company. I wouldn't necessarily say we're a high stress environment. I think it's more just that we're definitely high achievers. But that also goes for high achievement in their personal life. It goes for high achievement in their, I don't delve into their relationships, but I'm assuming that if they're happy in their personal life, they probably have a relationship with their friends or family and things like that. So we really try to focus on things like their health. Their mental health is obviously one of them, but even their physical health. We actually encourage people to try to, make time for that. One of my top salespeople, I actually told him, I remember telling him when he first started working with us, he was like, hey, could I take meetings after 9? Like, could that be my start date? And I was like, I don't care. You're producing. And he loved to surf. He loves surfing here in Los Angeles. And I was like, if you want to catch the tides and do that in the morning every day, do it. Like, doesn't matter to me. Just as long as you're working afterwards, it's fine. Right. So I think that's the big difference. And hopefully that's why our retention, our turnover, like for client or employees, is very low. And why everyone pretty consistently always says our culture is what they love the most about our company. It's because of the freedom. I think it's the freedom of work, right? And setting their goals. And then in terms of reiterating, challenging them on their goals, we have a folder that has all of their plans, and we just review it. I just review it on a weekly basis and just skim through them and make sure everybody is hitting what they say they're going to hit,
Awesome. It's a really great focus. I love that. I'm hoping that everybody's really learning from that, because that is not a common situation. Not everybody can employ that same, like template or whatever framework, just given the nature of the work. But I think a really important thing to think about there is putting the people in charge of their work-life experience and the difference that they can make.
It is definitely, I will say, it is definitely something that came a little bit easier once we got to a certain size, because we had enough revenue to actually allow that freedom. So I think it is harder when you're getting started. But I will say, and I don't necessarily know if I would have done it the same way I did when I started, which when I started, I didn't used to do these things. I think I would have implemented these from day one, even though it would have been harder. And the reason why is there's a good quote from Charlie Munger where he says, you show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcomes. If you give someone a really good incentive, you can have a lot easier time running your business because they're going to basically run it for you, right? Like, that's amazing. That's what you want,
Yes.
An entrepreneur is just someone who's willing to take the risk, but an entrepreneur is someone who doesn't have to take the risk, but they still like to scale the business. So if you can take the risk and they just scale the business, then you've won. You make money, they make money, everyone wins, right?
Right. And so I think what you're talking about though is like that, that like risk tolerance, right? Because I see so many people make these mistakes in their first few hires, and that they're nervous about spending the money because it's a new experience to have somebody on payroll, and it can be really uncomfortable or feel like pressure, right? But if you bring people in too low, if the incentive is not correct, then you're not going to get the outcomes of the performance that you really need. Those first 5 hires in a new business are so important, right?
Yes.
Seeing you agree, like I cannot underpin this enough, that it is worth it to spend the extra in the beginning because it's going to significantly change your trajectory over this next few years.
100%. And one thing I do also tell people is I try to remind them that if somebody writes that plan and they say they only want to make $50,000 per year, that's not a problem, in my opinion. Like, I have no problem with that because that's just the life they want to live. And there are people who do that mainly because they're like, I don't really want to focus on work. I don't want work to be my thing. I just want to check. I'm an artist and I want to go do something else. And I'm like, fine, that's totally fine. Like, whatever the number is, it just means that 50,000 is a lot easier for me to hit than somebody saying they want to get to 1 million, or like one of my partners, he says he wants to be at $10 million. I'm like, okay, that's going to require a lot of my time to get there. That's the only difference. But there's no problem in that. The operation is still as efficient as long as you have people who are hitting their goals and are running it almost autonomously. The operation is still just as efficient, even if they're not all aiming for making a ton of money,
Yeah. It's also depends on the person, right? Like I know some people who are totally driven and jazzed up about their business, and like it's not even a thing to spend time on it because they're in such amazing flow. And really, at the end of the day, what we're seeking is a feeling.
Yes.
And what we are trying to do is to create that feeling for ourselves by spending time in our hobbies or with people we love or within the vitamin D, like whatever it is. We're just trying to like create that experience for ourselves. And it just comes through different ways for different people.
It definitely does. It definitely does. And that is also the kind of the reason I set that goal to be less logical, because one, I realized I was definitely getting a lot more men to apply, and that was an issue because I think not that there's like I think I do realize that there at least from some of the men that are on my team, they tend to look at things very logical. I'm not going to make any statements here. I don't want to be putting anything out there that's not based on any actual facts. I don't know, but I do think that just from the people that I've hired, there's definitely some men on my team who are like hyper logical. Maybe not logical is a good word, just like less empathetic to more broader issues, like taking care of their families or like actually having more of a focus there. And I think that part of the reason why I'm trying to be less logical in the sense that, or more empathetic, maybe less logical is a bad word, but just more empathetic, is because I feel like I can then make it more representative of like the entire diversity that needs to be in my company, right? Because we have a bit of an imbalance there. And I'm trying to like open that up to get a broader range of opinions. And I can't speak for all men. I can't speak for all women, but I know for myself, I am definitely very logical. And at least the men we have on our team are very like hyper logical and very low empathy. That's a problem, right? So I'm trying to fix it. My girlfriend's been helping me with that in terms of like, how can I make this a better environment for the opposite gender, right? And not being so like heavy on the tech, not so heavy on the development, right? Like, how can I do that, right? So that's definitely a consideration, is like opening up that other side of things, right?
Sure. Yeah. Well, hey, good for you for being aware of it. I mean, you can't fix any problems if we don't look and see that we have them. So like, that's awesome. And thank you for vulnerably sharing that with all of us, because the very reason that I have this show is that there's a dark side to entrepreneurship and people don't talk about it. And there's no platform to say like, hey, my business isn't doing awesome, but I still need to make a good brand face for it.
I know.
That's what, like sharing there's challenges, like you're not alone in that challenge, like the whole industry struggles with it. So thanks for talking about
it. It is challenging because like even because like for instance, I think the only reason why I use the word logical is because when you think of people who apply for software development roles, they tend to be like hyper logical, and most of my applicants are men. And that's the thing, because of the way that the education system is and limiting opportunities for women and things like that, which we need to do a better job at. But it's like I have to. It's like that. You have to also make sure you're creating an environment that makes it an interesting environment to work at if you're not a man, right? And so that's the thing, and that's where, it's just a big like strategic priority for this year, right? So that's one thing we're trying to work on.
Yeah, I think, so another word I would use is like rational brain versus logical brain, because you don't
Yeah.
want to suspect that people who don't fit that are illogical, right?
Yes, that's why I'm trying to like fix that word. I think it's because a lot of people tell me I'm hyper logical, and so I use that word, but I'm trying to find a better way to describe it. So
So
yes,
you could say rational, you could say linear,
linear
thinking.
is a great word. Yeah,
Yeah.
linear is a great word.
But another, thought I had about it is not even just changing the way you think, because the way you think is already super reinforced. It's worked so well for you. Like
Yeah.
why would, your behavior pattern would tell you it'd be very difficult to change that. But you might explore the organizational values and
Mhm.
how are we living and breathing and really demonstrating the
Yes.
organizational values, because that is usually a really great like lag indicator of who you have in the room. And
Yes.
so if you want a shift in that, that might be a place to start.
Yeah, I think so. I think definitely from that book, The Culture Code, right? They talk about how culture is just a set of habits and like actions that individuals take, right? And so in that aspect, part of the reason for having the community and the gatherings and things like that is also to build more of a team environment in general, right? You can actually go, probably contrary to popular opinion, I think you can go a pretty long way without having everybody operate necessarily as a team. Um, like you can run a business where everyone is pretty individualistic.
Mhm.
Selfish is not good. You don't want people who are selfish, but you could have people who are kind of autonomous, right? Um, but you lose so much if you try to scale that. I think you need people to be working as a team, right? And culture, those principles, those values you're talking about, that's what kind of rallies people around the flag, you know?
Mhm.
And so, yes, I agree completely.
Tell me about maybe some moments along the way, some breakthroughs, some eye openers that changed the way that you show up now as a leader or maybe run your business.
Yeah. So I just recently had one, and it has actually, I'm putting this out there. I feel like it'll happen. I'll cross my fingers, but I think, like I said, we did about $1.7 million last year in sales. I think we're going to do 10 million this year. And I know that sounds like a huge jump, but the reason why is because I finally feel like I understand how value works, like how to sell on value and not on price. Um, I could do the exact same thing this year with this new sales process we have and get to that number without spending any more money or doing anything differently, just because I understand how value works. And what I mean by that is uh, getting people to pay for the solution and not the service, because we're a marketing service, right? Getting them to pay for the solution. So, for instance, people are willing to pay a lot more money for the exact same thing if you can have a guarantee behind it, right?
Mhm.
So I realized the power of that and having a really good offer. And that alone is going to just fundamentally change everything. And it already has. So like we've sent out more proposals for $7,000, $10,000, $40,000 a month than we ever in the history of our business. Cause all we did was we just asked them, what do you want? Like, what do you really, really want? And then they tell us, and instead of sending them to us like a service, like SEO or something, we said, what do you really want? And then when they tell us, we're like, okay, well, we can't do that for $2,000 a month, obviously. If you want that, you're gonna have to spend money. Like it has to happen, right? So understanding that value is a completely separate conversation than price has been it's just absolutely game changing. Like it's incredibly game changing. So I'm excited, and the book I got that from, just if anyone's interested, is called $100 Million Offers. It's by a guy
Mhm.
named Alex Hermosi. Have you heard of it?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
We're
So
familiar with Alex's work. Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of spreading like wildfire because he did a really smart thing where he basically is I think it's like you only pay for the minimum amount that you can actually pay on Amazon. So I think it's like 99 cents is the actual lowest price you can put it at. So it's essentially free, right? And so everyone's just getting it, talking about it. There's just so much value he provides that it's the most viral book I think I've seen since like maybe the 4 Hour Work Week or something.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. Super cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
And as a marketer, thinking about that approach, right, is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Um, And when I think about those value conversations too, I like to take it one step further and get them thinking about what becomes possible if you take that step with us or whatever, because then once they're living in that dream solution, now it's like price is no object. Like we need to get there. We need, what becomes possible is we get to scale or we have exponential growth or whatever. And of course that's worth 7,000.
Yes. Well, especially if you can guarantee it. And the thing is that when you are the real secret is that when you are crazy profitable, you can guarantee things, right? Because you're making a huge margin and you can actually deliver on that. And you should be rewarded for that margin because you've figured out how to do something in a way that they can't get. So one thing I do is I provide, or you'll probably love this. You probably heard this before, but especially with the psychology background and everything, I provide a reframe at the beginning of the conversation with the client, right? So what I do is I say, I basically say, have you ever hired an employee for our rate, right? Who came to the table on day one with a 12-month action plan with deliverables where you didn't have to manage them, where they were guaranteeing results, where they could provide great results, where they weren't going to do any turnover because they're not going where because there's no chance, right? Like, can you get that for, let's say, $20 to $35 per hour? The answer is no. I've hired a lot of people. You cannot get that because if they've done that and they've worked on hundreds of campaigns before, they're probably running their own business, right? And so we're taking advantage of an opportunity in the market, which is arbitraging the fact that you can't get that level of service and that work and that value for that price. And when people think of it like that, then they're like, oh yeah, you're right. I mean, they're giving me a team of experts for $4,000 a month, $5,000 a month. That's a huge steal, right? Mm-hmm. And so then they feel really good. You might have a super good margin on that, but it's because you've identified an arbitrage opportunity. You're only getting that margin because you can do so much for so little on your side. And then when you have so much profit, you can hire the best talent, you can do the most things, and that's what catapults your business. So that's why we started growing extremely fast, even more so than last year. And I do think that'll carry on for the future. So yeah, but it's all psychology. Like the difference between people making $2 million a year and 10 is just psychology. It's like we figured out how to have a great product, we have a great service, but it's just how you frame things now. That's it. So
yeah, that's super exciting. Well, tell me, what would you say is like the number one behavior that got you to where you are? Sorry, I have
yeah.
Buddy, I forgot.
Oh no, you're good. You're good. I was like, I heard a noise, but I didn't know what noise it was.
My daughter. And she loves to talk to the people who are on the computer screen, which when you think about for them, like that's kind of blowing their mind that there's people on my screen and they talk back. And that's super interesting. What's that number one thing you'd identify that maybe you didn't even think it was like related to your success before, but now you see it as like, oh, this is the skill that really like got me to this next level in my business.
Yeah. So over the last 6 months, I started doing these interviews, I started interviewing people, interviewing agency owners specifically. I've done, I think, 60 interviews so far since then. Right? Yeah.
Tell us what it is.
Oh, it's how to scale an agency. It's growing very fast, which I'm very humbled by. But we've identified a little bit of a blind spot because there's a lot of information out there about SaaS companies, real estate companies, but digital marketing agencies, there's a lot of info about like marketing, but not really about growing your marketing agency in terms of like their metrics, like what the churn is, how fast they're scaling, what things are they doing to scale. That kind of data, to me, at least in the podcast world, which I listen to so many podcasts, was kind of absent. So we kind of hit a bit of a blind spot or a point where people have high demand for something. And that's been great. So, but yes, doing these interviews, we've done like 60 now. That has radically changed my business because now I feel, because I've interviewed people who do way more revenue than us by like leaps and bounds. The biggest one I've done was $54 million agency owner. And I feel like I just have a bird's eye view on everything. Like I'm looking at everything now and I feel like I just know what to do next. Right.
Yeah.
So I know that, like, at least I think that my company would probably be honestly at an extraordinarily high level of revenue right now, probably like 20, 30 million if I had started on day one with a podcast, and that podcast would already also be at like 1 million listens a month, probably, because it'd been like 4 years in the making. So if I had done that, if I had stuck with a niche and I didn't jump around from niche to niche, and you know, and I had also implemented all the offer things and the value things I mentioned earlier, but that is the one thing that has helped. And you know, Russell Brunson talks about this too in his books. Yeah, he talks about it. He says that's one of the best things you can do is have a podcast, because there's nowhere else you can get that much, you know, into the minds of the listener. And I feel like for the podcast I listen to, I feel like I really know this person, even though we never really had a conversation. I feel like I really know them, you know? That's a big thing.
Yeah. And I mean, so what I hear, like some of that stuff are like, it's part of the journey you had to go through, right? To get to where you are, like jumping around from these different niches. It's just as important to figure out what you're not about as it is like to figure out what you are about. But one of the key things I heard you say is like talking to mentors and like having conversations with people who have already been there, who are at that next step, and that has made a difference. Like you said, just gaining that perspective of, and I actually listened to that episode that you did, and it was really awesome.
Really? Wait, which one was that? Which one was that? I'm curious.
You could do it on your email list, and it sent out. For you guys, like you just want like a basic, you know, just to see what it looks like to run awesome marketing campaigns. Just sign up for Lucas's, you know, email list. It's really, I don't give away free compliments here because.
Thank you. Yeah. So I did. That is actually. Was that? So you said
it's really well done. You know, like.
Thank you. You know, that is actually something that I will say is another growth hack too, which if somebody wants to try it, it also changed my business, was just change your relationships, your client relationships, from finite relationships to infinite relationships. That is the key, right? So my clients would have a set amount. They'd pay like on average $10,000 to $15,000, and then they'd move on, right? But they weren't done growing. Like, how many of them actually went out of business? None of them, you know, like very few. There were some, definitely, especially during COVID, but they didn't like just stop. Even if they went out of business, they were probably still entrepreneurs and they still wanted to make it work, right? And so I was giving away so much opportunity was just leaking through my funnel, right? And so what I've started doing now is I just look at it as, hey, if they're not unsubscribing by now, they probably want my content, right? Because like they have had 30 opportunities over the last 3 months to unsubscribe, and they're not, because I usually do one every 3 days. And so I'm like, if the open rate's high, if the click-through rate's high, and people are still taking action, they want that relationship with me, right? And so then it's easy, because all you have to do is just challenge yourself to write multiple pieces of content per day. You repurpose some of that into your newsletter, and then you never, ever, ever lose the relationship. Now, I will say that it is possible to lose the customer, because you might have someone who takes a momentary break, or they want to do something. And if you don't have any good downsell options, like for $97 per month or anything like tiny, you might lose the customer, but you won't lose the relationship. And that is the key, right? So I appreciate the kudos, because I did put a lot of time and effort into that, and it has changed a lot. So
awesome. Well, I see it. So nailed it. But what a really great point, that at the end of the day, relationships are still everything. You know, there's the world is changing, the way we come to work, the future of our housing is going to change, but still relationships are really what drives so much. And if you're not investing into those relationships to some degree, you're going to miss out. So
you definitely are. It's a huge advantage. Like, we're launching a magazine as part of the membership this next week. I guess I'll just say it. I haven't actually made it. I've told everyone on the planet that I'm releasing it next week, but I haven't actually put it to print. Like, I haven't even started on it. But I just kind of believe that if you put, I have the material, I just haven't written it down or like put it in the magazine. But you know, you got to start somewhere. It's like, if I don't do it now, I'm going to push it off to next month and the month after that. And if I don't have a date, then I'm just going to keep finding excuses. So I was like, I'm just going to do it. I know it's what I need to do. It's probably going to be crap, but people are going to like it, because they're going to be like, when's the last time I got a magazine? It's like, people don't get magazines anymore from businesses they work with. So I figured might as well do it.
That's cool. I love it. Yeah. Well, I'm sure you and I could talk for
Yeah.
hours about some of this stuff. It's been super wonderful. I want to make sure people have an opportunity to find you, to get on your email list, to start having a relationship with you. How could people do that?
Well, I would love it if they would listen to the How to Scale an Agency podcast. That definitely seems like people enjoy it. All you got to do is wherever you listen to podcasts, just go to How to Scale an Agency. Spotify is great, Apple Podcasts, and you'll find us. So got some great tips and tricks on how to scale your agency. And we've been lucky enough to interview some massive agencies, and those people have helped me tremendously. So give it a listen.
All right. Well, you guys heard it. There are several ways to find him, and I'm going to make sure those are all in the show notes. So you guys, all you have to do is one simple click of a link. If you guys are watching this live right now, go to his profile, and there's ways to find it all there. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'm certain that you have had eye-opening moments over the last 45 minutes, and I hope you take those and run with them and come back for more. So until next time, thank you so much, guys, for joining.
Thank you, Brittany.